and welcome to this week's book club reading of Star Wars Aftermath, Life Debt. If you're not familiar with this, you can click here and I'll take you back to the beginning of the playlist, but basically we've been going through this book a couple chapters at a time, discussing the themes and the events, and as you can see, we're almost done with the book. We have about 2 weeks after this, so if you want, there's a backlog waiting for you if you want to do that, or they're there waiting for you if you want to get caught up on your own time. Also, you can click here and it'll take you back to the playlist of the first book in the trilogy. This is book 2, and you can get started there. But with that, we're going to get into the chapters. We have quite a few things to discuss. We're going to start with Interlude 9. The interlude is about the freeing of Ryloth. The Empire is there. There's a battle. The Empire leaves because they're beaten and they're out of resources or whatever. But the real important thing in here is the character of Yendor. So Yendor was first from the novel Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. You will also see him in the novel Bloodline, also by Claudia Gray. He is going to be somewhat of a part of these books going forward, but it's just kind of fun because it's his story in between the two Claudia Gray novels. Obviously, the interludes have been referencing each other, have been referencing comic material, but this was just kind of cool to see them reference another author's material. Of course, as this book came out a couple of months after Aftermath, other books have been released. They will assume you've read the other books so they can start pulling in as we go. You'll see that with these interludes and eventually with Empire's End, the next book, that they can pull in all of these things because there's more things to reference. You know, Aftermath was one of the first books in the new canon, so they can finally start using more of this material. But with that, let's get to Chapter 34. Chapter 34 opens with Sloane recounting a story of her being a young girl and running away from home. She didn't like her planet, she didn't like what was going on there, she thought it was too backwater. She tries to escape, changes her mind, not gonna run away from home. Before she can get home, some pirates try to snatch her up and kidnap her and take her to some sort of horrible life before she's eventually rescued. Eventually, the Empire would come to her world and chase these pirates off. And we can see that this is where her idea of the Empire being a good thing comes from, right? As a child, she was not safe. If she went off by herself, albeit at night, but still, if she went off by herself, there would be bad people who would come and try to take her. And the Empire comes in, and suddenly, these bad people aren't there anymore. To reference something else that's going on in Star Wars right now, if you've been following Star Wars Resistance, which I won't spoil too much if you haven't seen any of it. I guess this technically counts as a spoiler, but it's not something that's going to be a fundamentally big deal. But we find out that the character of Tam is somewhat sympathetic to the First Order, not because she likes their ideals, but because she likes safety and security and all of that good stuff. And so it's kind of a similar storyline between the two. I mean, we know that Sloane has somewhat of a moral code. She doesn't like slavery, as we talked about last week, and different things. Even though she's definitely on the dark side, she is still okay with killing people. She just justifies it because it's for a greater good. That story is an important piece of understanding, you know, who Sloane is and how she got here. As the chapter continues, we see that Sloane is constantly on edge. She's in the lion's den. She's trying to do these false peace talks. She knows that they're false. She knows that peace is not going to happen. She knows an attack is coming, but she doesn't even know what that attack is. So she's just on edge. She's getting paranoid. She's jumping at shadows, but the shadows are actually there, and she's struggling with that. Then we go to Nora's perspective, and Nora sees Sloane's ship come in, and she's filled with rage. I mean, the last time she saw this woman, they were fighting ship to ship in space, and Nora thought she killed her, and it turns out she didn't. Nora almost died, one of the many times Nora almost dies, and Nora's really struggling with this. And that struggle gets interrupted by Brenton coming home. Now, we know that Brenton is fresh off of attacking Timon. Nora, of course, doesn't know this. And they actually end up having this really sweet moment, right? The book describes him as kind of coming in and out of his fog. He needs help getting dressed, and so Nora's helping him. She's picking out the clothes. She's helping getting him dressed, and it's this quiet moment that the two of them haven't really had, and they have this really sweet moment where he's worried, and he's asking her if they're going to be okay, and she tries to answer him. And of course, we finally get this sweet, tender moment between the two of them when we know that Brenton is up to things. Now, at this point in the book, if you haven't read any further, your blood is probably boiling at Brenton, who is betraying and seemingly lying to Nora. I don't want to get into this too much still. I want to wait until things happen. This is a frustrating scene. It is a frustrating scene to finally see Nora gets some peace and makes some progress when we know that there's other things afoot. Meanwhile, Timon is locked in a box. So he's alive, he was just stunned in more ways than one, and he's stuck in a box, and Timon at this point is rationalizing, right? He's like, my dad shot me, I have to figure out what this means. He doesn't necessarily want to jump to dad's super evil. Somehow he manages to not blame this on Nora, which was really character growth for Timon's part, but he is like, okay, maybe his dad's caught up in something and he had to fake Timon's death, and he's still not really willing to accept it, but he does know he needs to find his mom right away. And this is something I appreciate too, where Timon is struggling and projecting onto his mom, and there is that tension there. He doesn't truly ultimately hate her, because at this point he could easily just team up with Bones and try to do it himself, not even consider Nora, worry that both of his parents are in on it or some such, but instead he's like, nope, rubber's meeting the road, I'm gonna go find mom and we're gonna figure this out because, oh boy. So I appreciated that about Timon, and I feel like they keep the angst between the two of them there, or Wendig, I should say, keeps the angst between the two of them there, but it's never too much. Sometimes it flirts with being too much, but it never really is. And I did appreciate that kind of thought process from Timon. Chapter ends by going back to Sloane, but it's more of what I already said. She's paranoid. She doesn't want to do the pomp and circumstance parade that Mon Mothma has invited her to. She's mad because Ada has kind of forced her into a corner where she has to do this. Sloane is paranoid, and we see Ada, her aide, being very calm, cool, and collected in all this. Now remember, we know that Ada has a bit of a thing going on with Rax. So and Sloane doesn't necessarily know this yet. So there's a lot of things going on in this chapter right now. A lot of different dynamics. We're going to jump over to chapter 35 now. Here we see the rest of the Aftermath crew. They're still trying to free Kashyyyk, which is currently being bombarded from space, and Han Solo has come up with a plan. They're going to steal a Star Destroyer. So I really liked the pairing of Han and Sinjir. They're kind of a hilarious two people to put together. Sinjir is cynical, Han is cynical, but they have this kind of different sort of cynicism. Sinjir is a worrywart, Han is, we'll just figure it out, it'll work itself out. And seeing them kind of play off of each other was really fun. Especially as the chapter continues, Sinjir is constantly in awe of how luck follows Han Solo. And whatever they're doing just kind of seems to work out. And then of course the chapter ends where their luck has run out. So they successfully take the bridge of a Star Destroyer, but then they're attacked again, and we're left with them in this chapter caught, not any better off, and we don't know how they're going to get out of it. The freakiest part about this chapter is the way they break into the Star Destroyer, the way they create a distraction and fight the stormtroopers, is those spiders that were mentioned a couple of chapters back. The Wookiees caught a bunch of them, and they just released them onto the Star Destroyer. I don't really know the wisdom of this plan, because after you've distracted the Imperials and taken over the Star Destroyer, you still have a Star Destroyer with a lot of giant spiders on them, so that's something. I really appreciated Sinjir's description of how the spiders are the size of his grandmother. This chapter was very much a plot moving forward, but it was fun seeing it from Sinjir's perspective and Sinjir's perspective on Han. These books have been having a lot of fun with pairing different characters up and seeing how the different characters interact with each other, and this was a really cool mashup. Especially considering how good of friends Jazz and Sinjir are, and so much of this book has been Jazz and Han kind of finding an understanding with each other. It's almost like Jazz is like the prime friend and her best friend is Sinjir, but her other friend is Han, and she gets along with them both, but they don't necessarily get along with each other, and it was just kind of an interesting dynamic. Then we get to chapter 36. In chapter 36, we start with Wedge. Wedge is still recovering. He's not allowed to do combat duty, so he helped plan everything that's going on, but he can't really be a part of it, and it's driving him crazy. He wants to be involved, but unfortunately for him, he's going to get his wish. He receives a message from Princess Leia, who's like, yo, I went to Kashyyyk. LOL. You better either come get me or you're going to have a really high value prisoner to negotiate in your peace negotiations. So Wedge freaks out, and he runs to talk to Mon Mothma. Meanwhile, we go back to Sloane's perspective. Sloane hates watching this parade. The parade, the way it's described, like the gymnasts like jumping from different things and like the crazy music, I almost wondered if this was an intentional reference to the Star Wars Holiday Special, because it reminds me of the gymnastics stuff that Lumpy watches in the beginning. If you've never seen that, we've covered it a little bit on the channel. I recommend looking at it. It's kind of a fun thing that all Star Wars fans should subject themselves to at some point, I think. But I kind of wondered if that wasn't an intentional reference, especially because this book has referenced other parts of the Holiday Special. But if that was a reference to it, it wouldn't be the only reference to the Star Wars Holiday Special, as we will see more of going forward. But anyway, back to Sloane and Mon Mothma. They're having a conversation. Mon Mothma is taking this point to kind of start the peace talks a little bit early, where she's like, look, this parade represents our individuality, our diversity, these things that the Empire doesn't like, doesn't promote, and Sloane hates every second of it, and she's really trying hard to contain it. Like, her inner thoughts just show so much disdain. And reading it, I felt like Sloane was kind of losing her cool a little bit. Like, all of this makes sense. She would hate the Alliance, she would hate the New Republic, she would see all of this as beneath her. The extent that it bothered her so much, I think, is because one, she doesn't want peace talks, so she hates being there anyway, and two, she's on edge. And so the writing not only felt like Sloane's true feelings about what was going on, but it also very much felt like how I know when I'm in a situation or a scenario that causes me a lot of anxiety, I tend to be a lot more cranky about it. I tend to have a lot more internal dialogue where it's like, well, I don't want to be here, and this is dumb, and I don't want to do this, and you try to keep it to yourself. And that really felt like what Sloane was doing here. So this passage to me felt like, yes, it was something that was showing us Sloane's inner thoughts and opinions on things, but it was also showing us her emotional state and how she's a little bit more, how she's a little bit more petty, maybe, in this moment. She's also being offset by how authentic Mon Mothma is. She describes this as something that is surprisingly bothersome to her. I think at some level, it's probably bothering Sloane because Sloane is not being authentic. And I think Sloane is somebody who does usually appreciate authenticity, but why she might not be able to see it within herself, I think it could be a guilt thing in this particular point in time. Wedge comes in to talk to Mon Mothma, and they have kind of an interesting moment, because of course the last time that Sloane saw Wedge, he was on the verge of death because she was having him tortured. So Wedge is like super shooting daggers at her, and Sloane actually kind of feels guilty. She recognizes that he was just a pawn in a lot of ways, like Sloane was, and she does feel bad, but she's heartened actually by the fact that he hates her so much, because that means she might have broken his body, because he's limping, he's using a cane, all of that, but his spirit is not broken. And so that was a kind of an interesting thing, especially because she's being I can't think of a better word than petty, but so dismissive of Mon Mothma, but respectful of Wedge. And I think it's probably easier for her to not like Mon Mothma because they haven't really interacted, where she feels a personal responsibility going on with Wedge. And then we end the chapter talking with Rax. Rax is ready to act. He's talking to one of his cronies, and he tells him to send the entirety of the fleet, the Imperial fleet, or at least that's how I read it, to a specific location. Up until this point, the fleets have been kind of separated, so they can't easily be found. There's been spaceships that have been hidden from others. He wants everyone to converge on a specific point. And Rand, the guy he's talking to, is like, hey, does Sloane know about this? And Rax is like, she doesn't, she will, we're going to get the council together, we're going to tell them what's going on. So basically, Rax is kind of setting up his end game. We're going to slowly start to see what's really going on. But the thing we have to learn about first is what is actually going to happen to Chandrila. Because, I mean, again, I know how the book ends, so I don't really want to spoil anything or talk too much. If the ships were going to Chandrila, Rax would probably just say Chandrila, wouldn't he? So what is going to happen there? And we're going to figure out what happens there here real soon. So we're going to discuss this next week. For next week, read chapters 37 and 38. And then the week after that, we're going to finish the book. So we're really close to being done. I kind of forgot that the crux of the story happens at the very end of Life Debt, which means I'm excited to get to Empire's End for many reasons, but also to kind of get into the resolution of what happened. But we're going to talk about that next week. We're almost done with the book. I am so excited. Please leave me a comment about what you thought about the chapters that we read this week. Tell me what you think about the series overall so far. Please follow us on all the socials. I love talking to you guys and chatting with you guys, and I will talk to you guys next week.